Welcome to Voice of Alicia, where stories breathe, emotions speak, and every word paints a world of its own. Close your eyes, relax your mind, and step into a story crafted just for you. The aroma of freshly baked croissants, a scent I still associate with extravagance, hung in the air of my son's enormous, clinically modern kitchen. It was Mother's Day, and I sat at a marble island that felt cold and foreign, even though I had been coming here for 5 years, ever since my son, Ethan, became a millionaire. Not just a millionaire, but the kind who owns houses with infinity pools and cars that whisper when they accelerate. He made his fortune young, in tech, and in doing so, he built a wall between his life and mine. A wall made not of brick, but of sheer, overwhelming wealth and a quiet, almost imperceptible shame. I watched him from across the expanse of the kitchen. He was on a call, of course, his voice a low, confident rumble as he discussed things I didn't understand: venture capital, IPOs, market disruption. He was impeccably dressed in casual but expensive designer wear, his hair perfectly coiffed. He was everything a mother could wish for in terms of success. Yet, seeing him, I felt a familiar, deep ache, an emptiness where the simple connection of a mother and son used to be. The Ethan I raised, the boy who used to track mud onto the cheap linoleum floor of our 2-bedroom apartment and hug me with sticky, paint-covered hands, seemed to be trapped somewhere behind the veneer of his success. Clara, his impossibly beautiful and equally successful wife, glided into the kitchen. She carried a tray with a delicate porcelain teapot, moving with the practiced grace of someone who never rushes and never worries about breaking anything valuable. Clara is the kind of woman who makes me feel perpetually underdressed and slightly clumsy. She manages the household, which is more like a small luxury resort, with the silent efficiency of a CEO. She gave me a polite, almost practiced smile, her eyes a little distant. "Happy Mother's Day, Catherine," she said, her voice smooth, placing the tea set down. "Ethan will be just a minute. He wanted to make sure everything was perfect for you today." Perfect. The word felt heavy, like the silver teacup I now held. Their idea of perfect was this ritual, an expensive brunch, a brief, obligatory conversation, and then, the moment I dreaded most, the presentation of the gift. The gift was never wrapped. It was always delivered in the form of a discussion about my needs, a discussion that felt less like a gesture of love and more like a financial review. I took a sip of the Earl Grey. It was the finest tea, of course, but it tasted flat to me. "It's beautiful, Clara," I said, gesturing vaguely at the room. I felt compelled to say something complimentary to justify my presence in their opulent world. I missed the smell of burnt toast and instant coffee in my old kitchen, the kind of breakfast where we'd laugh over the newspaper. Ethan finally hung up, sliding his $2,000 phone into his pocket. He strode over, and for a fleeting second, his expression softened. He leaned in and gave me a quick, almost corporate hug, a torso-to-torso brush that avoided contact with my cheek. "Mom," he said, his voice bright, putting on the dearly beloved son tone for the occasion. "Happy Mother's Day. Everything okay here? Did Clara get you settled?" "I'm wonderful, dear," I replied, trying to put genuine warmth into my voice, trying to break through the polite armor he wore. "Just lovely. Thank you for inviting me." He sat opposite me, not quite meeting my eyes, instead inspecting a stray crumb on the immaculate counter. "So," he began, the familiar shift in his posture signaling the beginning of the inevitable formal conversation, "I know this is a busy time for us, but I want to make sure you know we're thinking of you. I appreciate everything you did for me, getting me through those lean years. The phrase lean years sounded almost poetic when he said it, a quaint historical period from which he had dramatically escaped. "It was just life, Ethan," I corrected softly. "It was what any mother would do." He waved away the sentiment with a dismissive flick of his wrist. "No, Mom, it was a lot, and that's why I want to make sure you are comfortable now. You don't have to worry about anything. That's the whole point of this." He paused, his eyes finally landing on mine, and it was in that moment, in the manufactured quiet of his beautiful home, that he delivered the line that would echo in my heart for weeks. He leaned forward, lowering his voice slightly, adopting a tone of benevolent concern, as if he were discussing a complicated charity donation. "Mom," he began, "on Mother's Day, I just wanted to check in. Do you actually like the $5,000 Clara gives you every month? Is that amount still working for your expenses, or should we consider increasing it?" The question wasn't, "Did you enjoy your Mother's Day?" or "How are you really doing?" It wasn't even a question about the source of the money. It was about the liking of the $5,000 monthly allowance. The literal price tag of my peace of mind, or perhaps the price tag of my exclusion from his real life. He spoke about it as if it were a utility bill, a necessary but ultimately uninteresting financial transaction managed by his wife. The sheer casualness of the sum, $5,000, a sum that was nearly twice my entire retirement pension, spoken as if it were pocket change, hit me with a dizzying wave of sorrow and profound hurt. My hand trembled slightly, rattling the teacup and its saucer. This wasn't a gift of love, it was a stipend, a retainer paid to keep the past quiet and the present manageable. Clara gives it to me, not Ethan. Clara, his gatekeeper, his financial administrator. The money had always come from her accounts, a detail I had tried to ignore. It had always felt less like a son's devotion and more like a generous severance package. But hearing him ask if I liked the money, on Mother's Day no less, solidified the stark, agonizing truth. My millionaire son had outsourced the very act of caring for his mother to his wife, reducing our relationship to a recurring deposit, a comfortable financial transaction designed to remove me as a concern. I swallowed, the expensive tea suddenly feeling like dust in my throat. I looked at his handsome, successful face, and I saw the boy I raised, the one who worked 2 paper routes to buy me a cheap but lovingly chosen flower arrangement every Mother's Day, completely obscured by the sheen of his corporate self. I realized that the question wasn't a show of care. It was an attempt to confirm that the money was enough to keep me silent, comfortable, and, most importantly, out of his hair. I had to formulate an answer, a careful reply that wouldn't betray the raw, sharp pain I felt. I couldn't lash out, couldn't risk the silent, glacial disapproval of Clara or the immediate defensive retreat of Ethan. I had to choose my words with the care of a diplomat negotiating a fragile peace. The $5,000 was a magnificent sum, a godsend that allowed me to live without the fear of destitution. But it felt like the silver bullet he had used to kill the emotional connection between us. My silence stretched, long and awkward, filled only by the distant hum of their high-tech refrigerator, a silence that he, in his self-absorption, seemed not to notice at all. He just waited, his expression expectant, waiting for my confirmation that the transaction was satisfactory and complete. The true Mother's Day gift he had given me was the stark clarity that my worth in his new, glittering world had been quantified, budgeted, and delegated. I took a deep breath, the air in the sterile, expensive room feeling thin and cold, and prepared to speak my truth, or at least a carefully sanitized version of it. The real struggle of that morning wasn't about the money. It was about the heartbreaking distance between the boy who used to adore me and the man who was now paying me off. I glanced at Clara, who was watching us both with that same distant, almost bored expression, confirming my fear. She saw me not as her mother-in-law, but as an ongoing expense. My voice, when it finally emerged, was steadier than I felt inside. "The money, Ethan, is more than enough," I said, choosing my words meticulously. I added a small, polite smile that felt brittle and forced. "Clara is very efficient with the transfers, never a hitch. It's a wonderful help, truly." I used the word help deliberately, trying to frame it as utility rather than a bribe, hoping to inject some dignity back into the exchange. I avoided the word like, refusing to validate his transactional framing of my emotional well-being. Do I like the $5,000? It was like asking a starving person if they like the loaf of bread, ignoring the desperation behind the acceptance. Ethan accepted this with a satisfied nod, a small, victorious smirk playing on his lips. It was the look of a CEO who has just confirmed that a necessary quarterly expense is under control. He didn't hear the undertone of reservation, the quiet heartbreak in my tone. He only registered the confirmation: problem solved, mother happy, conscience clear. "Good," he pronounced, sitting back slightly. "Because if there's any pressure, Mom, even a little, you need to tell us. We can easily adjust it to 7, even 8,000 if your cost of living is rising." He mentioned $8,000 with the same easy nonchalance one might use to discuss raising the thermostat by 2 degrees. My mind instantly flashed back to the tiny, damp, one-bedroom apartment where I raised him after his father left. I remembered working double shifts, cleaning houses and waiting tables just to scrounge together enough for his tuition so he could get the education that led him here to this ridiculous opulence. I remembered the sheer terror of finding $50 to fix a leaky pipe. $8,000 a month? It was a sum I couldn't comprehend as a regular occurrence. It felt like a joke played on my struggling past. I felt a sudden, fierce protectiveness over my memories, over the struggle that he now so easily dismissed and tried to plaster over with money. "Ethan, please, 5,000 is ample. I live a quiet life now, remember? I don't need a yacht." I tried to inject a touch of lighthearted humor, but it fell flat in the heavy, silent atmosphere of their kitchen. Clara gave a faint, almost imperceptible sigh, a subtle gesture that suggested I was being difficult or ungrateful by continuing the discussion. This dynamic was the new normal. Every visit was a performance where I had to prove I was neither a burden nor a beggar, just a grateful recipient of their generosity. The real Mother's Day gift, the presence, the conversation, the simple human connection was nowhere on the menu. It had been replaced by a financial review. I shifted the topic quickly, desperately searching for a normal interaction. "So," I started, trying to sound genuinely interested, "I saw that article about your company's new project. It sounds incredibly exciting, dear. The article mentioned something about sustainable energy integration." Ethan cut me off, not maliciously, but with the absent-minded impatience of someone interrupting elevator music. "Oh, that. Yeah, it's a big deal. High-level stuff, Mom. You wouldn't be interested in the details. It's mostly legal and compliance issues at this stage. Very dense." He smiled apologetically, yet condescendingly, confirming that my interest in his professional life, the life that defined him, was irrelevant. I was categorized: mother, recipient, non-technical. End of discussion. Clara, however, picked up on the thread with sharp, immediate interest. The compliance team is giving us headaches, Ethan. The latest draft from legal is a mess. We need to push back on the timeline for Q3 filings, or we risk running over budget on the lobbying efforts. She leaned toward him, speaking the language of their shared, privileged world, the language of the boardroom. They launched into a rapid-fire discussion filled with acronyms and jargon, instantly sealing me out. Their faces, animated and focused, reflected a mutual respect and connection that was palpable, a shared intellectual space I could never enter. I sat there, the invisible guest, the silent spectator to their actual life, feeling a profound sense of isolation. This was the real Ethan, the man who was passionate and engaged, and that man rarely showed himself to me. The Ethan who talked to me was the dutiful son, the one performing a mandatory social ritual. I looked down at my plate, picking at the perfect, crisp croissant. The $5,000 bought me security, yes, but it cost me my son. It purchased my silence and relegated me to the role of the comfortably retired parent whose opinions didn't matter and whose attempts at connection were gently, efficiently redirected. It was the price of admission to this gilded cage, and the payment was my relationship with him. I thought about the last time Ethan had truly seen me, truly connected. It was probably years ago, before the first big funding round, back when he was still scrambling, still grateful for my meager support, still calling me just to talk, not just to update me on his financial obligations. That boy would have been thrilled if I had simply made him breakfast on Mother's Day, not paid thousands for me to be served a catered one. A sharp, almost physical pang of jealousy hit me as I watched Clara and Ethan seamlessly transition from business talk to a private joke about a recent company retreat. Clara was not just his wife. She was his peer, his partner, his intellectual equal. She understood his world. I, his mother, only understood the simple, foundational life that he now considered beneath him. Well, I interjected gently, seizing a small lull in their conversation, I should probably head out soon. I have to catch the 1 a.m. bus. I didn't want to trouble you with a drop-off. The bus. The single word created a small, awkward ripple in their polished environment. Ethan frowned slightly. The bus, Mom? Why didn't you say anything? I'll have Leo take you. Clara, tell Leo to get the sedan ready for Catherine, and make sure he loads her shopping. He spoke about me as if I were a package to be transported, not a person with agency. Leo was his personal security and chauffeur, a man who intimidated me with his sheer size and silent efficiency. Oh, no, truly, Ethan, I insisted, a sudden need to cling to a shred of my own simple life surfacing. I like taking the bus. I enjoy the walk to the station. It gives me a chance to think. I was lying. I hated the bus, but I hated the feeling of being chauffeured by his employee even more. It only emphasized the vast, unbridgeable chasm between us. It was a refusal of the final layer of their gilded cage. He gave me a look of mild exasperation, the look that said, "Why can't you just accept the comfort I provide? Why must you always make things slightly difficult?" He misinterpreted my desire for independence as a form of stubborn martyrdom. Mom, it's Mother's Day. Please, let Leo drive you. It's safe, it's faster, and it's what I want. He made it sound like a condition of the allowance. Clara, ever the pragmatic one, stood up. I'll call him now, Catherine. Don't be silly. It's no trouble at all. He needs the miles anyway. She walked away to make the call, effortlessly dismissing my protest. I watched her go, realizing that every decision, even the most minor ones concerning my transit, was now managed and dictated by their system of efficient, expensive care. They had succeeded in providing for my comfort, but in doing so, they had utterly disempowered me. I was trapped. Not by financial need, but by the weight of their wealth and the silent, heartbreaking terms of their generosity. The bus, the one small, defiant link to my old life, was now being taken away, replaced by the hushed luxury of a sedan and the silent efficiency of a hired guard. The back seat of the black sedan was hushed, the leather cool beneath me, the windows tinted so darkly that the world outside felt muted and distant, like a poorly tuned television screen. Leo, the driver, was a silent sentinel, his presence a constant reminder that I was being professionally managed and transported. This was not a ride home. It was the controlled exit of a VIP from a secure location. I missed the rattle and rumble of the public bus, the smell of cheap perfume and exhaust, the anonymous glances of strangers. At least on the bus, I felt like I belonged to the real world, the world where people worried about bus fare and grocery prices, the world I still lived in, despite Ethan's insistence on insulating me with $5,000 a month. I sank deeper into the expensive upholstery, the emotional exhaustion of the morning settling heavily over me. Ethan's question, "Do you like the $5,000 Clara gives you?" replayed in my mind like a broken record, each repetition scratching away at my self-esteem. It wasn't the money itself that hurt. It was the implication that money was the sole measure of his affection and obligation. It was the substitution of a relationship with a transaction. I closed my eyes and let my mind wander back, searching for a memory of a Mother's Day that felt authentic, that felt like us. It was 10 years ago. Ethan was 22, still in university, buried under student debt, but full of blinding bright potential. We were still living in the old apartment, the one with the perpetually peeling paint in the kitchen. That year, he hadn't had a penny. He hadn't even been able to afford a card. Instead, he had spent the entire Saturday scraping together old pieces of wood from behind a construction site. He stayed up late, hunched over the rickety dining table, his brow furrowed in concentration. The next morning, Mother's Day, he presented me with his gift. It wasn't anything practical or valuable. It was a small, crudely built wooden shelf about a foot long, unevenly sanded, and painted a slightly alarming shade of blue with paint he had found abandoned in the storage closet. "It's for your books, Mom," he had said, his face alight with pride and exhaustion. "I know the ones by the bed always fall over. I built it just for you. It's perfectly level," he insisted, though it clearly wasn't. I remember holding that shelf, the smell of fresh wood and cheap blue paint filling the air. I had hugged him then, a real hug, one that lasted until my cheek was sore from the rough cotton of his old t-shirt. "It's the most wonderful gift, Ethan," I had whispered into his hair, and I meant it with every fiber of my being. That shelf wasn't a transaction. It was an investment of his time, his effort, and his love. It was a piece of him. I still have that shelf tucked away in my small guest room, even though it doesn't match the decor of my current modest apartment. It sits there, a powerful, ugly reminder of the Ethan I miss. The contrast between the wooden shelf and the $5,000 allowance was a painful chasm. The shelf was priceless because it had cost him something meaningful, his time and labor. The $5,000, on the other hand, cost him nothing but a few keystrokes on his banking app and an instruction to Clara. To him, it was a negligible expense, a rounding error in his vast fortune. To me, it felt like the price of his freedom from the obligation of emotional effort. I opened my eyes, staring out at the blur of trees flashing past the tinted window. I knew I couldn't reject the money. I needed it. It paid for my increasing medication costs, the occasional repair on my old car, the small comforts that kept the anxiety of the future at bay. Rejecting it would be a purely sentimental gesture that would only result in my own hardship. And worse, it would justify Ethan's belief that I was a difficult, ungrateful mother who didn't appreciate his hard work. The truth was, I felt like I had traded my son for comfort. The comfort was wonderful, yes, but it came wrapped in a cold, metallic sheath of alienation. I had raised him to be successful, ethical, and kind. He was undeniably successful, and in his own way, he believed he was being ethical and kind. After all, he was ensuring his mother's financial security. But the core component, the intimate, irreplaceable kindness of presence, was missing. I wondered, not for the first time, if I had failed him in some way. Had I emphasized material security too much when he was growing up, inadvertently teaching him that money solves all problems, including emotional ones? Or was this transformation simply the inevitable result of his immersion into a culture of extreme wealth, where human relationships were easily compartmentalized and managed? The car slowed, the silent efficiency of Leo bringing us to a smooth stop outside my small, quiet building. My building was pleasant, clean, and safe, another gift the allowance afforded me. But it was ordinary. It was a world away from Ethan's marble palaces. It was my world, though, and I felt a surge of relief to be back. Leo opened the door for me, his expression impassive. "Happy Mother's Day, ma'am," he mumbled, a practiced, neutral line. He even carried a small, heavy bag into my entryway, a bag I hadn't noticed. "Wait, Leo, what is this?" I asked, looking at the smooth designer shopping bag. "Mrs. Stone insisted, ma'am. A small token from her." He didn't wait for a reply, just placed the bag gently on the floor, offered a slight, formal nod, and retreated to the car, which pulled away from the curb with the same whispering grace it arrived with, leaving me alone. I stared at the bag. It was Clara's gift, separate from the $5,000. I opened it slowly. Inside was a meticulously wrapped, elegant box. I lifted the lid. It wasn't the wooden shelf. It wasn't a heartfelt card. It was an extremely expensive silk scarf, the kind I would never in a million years buy for myself, in a color I didn't particularly care for. Attached was a small, professionally printed card that read, "Happy Mother's Day, Catherine. Enjoy." No signature, no personal touch, just the cold certainty of quality and cost. Another transaction, this one wrapped in silk. I stood there, clutching the scarf and the memory of a blue wooden shelf, realizing that in their pursuit of giving me everything, my son and his wife had inadvertently taken away the only thing that mattered, the messy, inconvenient, unquantifiable feeling of being truly loved, not simply paid. I sighed, closing my front door behind me, the silence of my small apartment suddenly feeling both peaceful and deeply lonely. The silk scarf lay draped over the back of my armchair, an indictment of the morning's proceedings. It was magnificent, undeniably luxurious, but it felt heavy, a physical manifestation of the emotional debt I carried. It wasn't given from a place of understanding or affection, but from a calculated sense of duty, Clara's obligation to ensure all the appropriate Mother's Day boxes were ticked, right down to the tangible, expensive present. It was, like the $5,000, a way to purchase peace and avoid the messiness of true engagement. I went into the kitchen and made myself a simple cup of tea. Not the delicate, expensive Earl Grey, but my usual strong, cheap blend. The ritual felt grounding. As I waited for the kettle to whistle, I found myself walking over to my small, unassuming desk where I kept my financial records. I pulled out my bank statements, a habit born of decades of budgeting and anxiety. Even though the $5,000 arrived with clockwork regularity, I still needed to see it, to confirm it, to touch the reality of the numbers. The statement clearly showed the monthly deposit, a large, clean number, an instant comfort. But today, the digits didn't look like sustenance. They looked like chains. $5,000, deposited by Stone Family Trust. Not Ethan. Always the trust, managed by Clara. The trust was the buffer, the legal and emotional wall protecting Ethan from the inconvenience of directly dealing with his personal obligations, including his mother. It was an arrangement designed for maximum efficiency and minimum emotional exposure. I sat down and tried to do what I always did: budget. I planned to allocate a portion to savings, a portion to rent, a portion to utilities. But the process felt pointless. I wasn't budgeting to survive. I was budgeting to manage an excess. The amount was so large that the small decisions, should I buy the cheaper brand of rice or treat myself to the organic one, became trivial. The money had bought me financial freedom, but it had stripped away the everyday, meaningful struggles that once connected me to the person Ethan used to be. The person he was now lived in a world where such trivial choices didn't exist. I realized with a sudden, painful clarity that the $5,000 was not a gift, it was a salary. I was being paid to be comfortable, to be quiet, and to require nothing more from my son than financial support. It was a retainer to prevent the emergence of any embarrassing, working-class need that might tarnish the glossy surface of his millionaire life. The silence of my apartment, usually a comfort, now felt oppressive. I longed for someone to talk to. Someone who understood the complexity of this gilded misery. Most of my old friends were either struggling with their own modest retirement funds, or they knew Ethan as the successful, generous son who had taken care of his mother. How could I explain to them that the generosity was the problem? They would scoff, tell me I was ungrateful, or that I should simply be happy I didn't have to worry about rent. And they would be right in the purely pragmatic sense, but the heart demands more than pragmatism. Later that evening, the phone rang. It was Ethan calling for the obligatory end-of-day check-in. I braced myself. "Hey, Mom," he said, his voice cheerful, slightly rushed. I could hear the faint clinking sound of glasses and distant, sophisticated laughter in the background. He was clearly at a dinner or a party. "Just wanted to make sure Leo got you home safely. Everything all right?" "Yes, dear, everything was perfect," I replied, the lie slipping out easily now, a habit. "The brunch was delicious and the tea was lovely. I even managed to say, 'The scarf Clara gave me is absolutely beautiful. Thank you both very much.'" I had learned to perform the role of the grateful, non-demanding mother flawlessly. Great, he said, his enthusiasm waning now that the primary goal, confirming my satisfaction, was achieved. "Listen, I'm at a work dinner right now. It's huge, trying to close the Series C funding, so I can't talk long. But I just wanted to reiterate, if that $5,000 ever feels tight, you just call Clara. We'll bump it up. You shouldn't have to worry about a thing." He hadn't called to hear about my day or to share a story or to reminisce about old times, which is what I truly longed for on Mother's Day. He had called simply to perform the final audit on his filial duty. He was doing a mental inventory. Did I send the check? Yes. Did I host the brunch? Yes. Did I confirm her satisfaction? Yes. Now I can go back to my real life. A small, reckless urge rose up in me, a sudden, desperate need to pierce the perfect bubble of his success, to force him to see me beyond the trust fund deposit. "Ethan," I said, trying to keep my voice light but firm, "do you remember that blue wooden shelf you made me for Mother's Day back when you were in college?" There was a moment of silence on his end. a confused pause where the background noise seemed to dip. "The shelf?" he repeated, a distinct note of confusion in his voice. "Oh, God, yeah, that hideous thing? Mom, I think I used a butter knife to sand that. It was terrible. Why on earth would you bring that up?" He chuckled, a condescending, embarrassed laugh. "We should probably just toss it out now, shouldn't we?"
I can have Leo come by and pick it up for disposal, or maybe take it to a charity store.
His words landed with the stunning force of a physical blow. Toss it out, disposal. He didn't remember the love, the effort, the 22-year-old boy who poured his heart into cheap paint and scrap wood. He only saw the objective quality of the object, the hideous, the terrible. The shelf, which was the purest expression of his love, was to him trash, while the $5,000, the purest expression of his detachment, was his greatest gift. "No, Ethan," I said, my voice suddenly very quiet, stripped of all emotion. "Please don't worry about it. It's perfectly fine where it is." I couldn't bear to tell him I still treasured it. The gulf between us felt wider and deeper than ever. He had truly forgotten the value of the non-monetary gift, the value of sacrifice over convenience. "All right, well, I've got to jump back in," he said, already sounding relieved that the subject of the hideous shelf was closed. "Have a great night, Mom. Love you." He ended the call before I could properly reply. The line went dead, replaced by the persistent, empty dial tone. I put the receiver down slowly. The "I love you" felt automated, a part of the mandatory closing script, devoid of the warmth I yearned for. I was left alone in my quiet, safe, and entirely financed apartment, staring at the $5,000 deposit on the bank statement and the expensive, beautiful scarf. I realized that my task was not just to accept the money, but to somehow survive the painful reality that my son's vast fortune had completely eclipsed his memory of the simple, true love that had built his foundation. He had succeeded in every material way, but in the process, he had failed to remember the priceless things. I picked up the silk scarf, the coolness of the fabric reminding me of the Marble Island, and wondered how I could ever teach a millionaire son the true meaning of poverty of the heart. Days turned into weeks, and the memory of the Mother's Day brunch, particularly Ethan's question about whether I liked the $5,000, settled into my heart not as a sharp pain, but as a dull, constant ache. The silk scarf remained draped over the chair, an unwearable symbol of the disconnect. The bank account balance remained high, a constant reminder of the terms of our relationship. I had my financial security, but I was emotionally adrift. The incident forced me to confront a difficult truth about myself. I had been passively accepting Ethan's method of care, hoping that by being the good mother, the grateful, easy-to-manage mother, I might somehow lure the old Ethan back. I had been waiting for him to wake up and realize that money wasn't the answer to every human need. But he wouldn't. He couldn't. His reality was too far removed, too insulated by his wealth and his constant, high-stakes business dealings. He saw the world, and by extension our relationship, through a financial spreadsheet. I realized then that my mission wasn't to reject the money, because that was impractical and dramatic. My mission was to reject the meaning he had assigned to it. I had to stop seeing the $5,000 as the price of my silence or the substitution for his love. I had to redefine it in my own heart and mind as a tool for my own peace and empowerment, a foundation from which I could rebuild my own life, separate from his. One afternoon, I sat down at my desk and looked at the bank statement again. $5,000. I decided I would no longer let that number dictate my self-worth or the emotional tenor of my relationship with my son. I would use the financial freedom he provided to pursue the things that truly mattered to me, the things that he couldn't buy and wouldn't understand. I took the bulk of the next month's deposit and made an appointment with an art instructor. I had always loved painting when I was young, but raising Ethan and working multiple jobs had crushed that artistic outlet under the weight of necessity. Now, I had the means and the time. I signed up for a beginner's watercolor class at the local community center. The cost was minimal, a fraction of the allowance, but the value felt immense. It was an investment in the me that I had put on hold for decades. The first few classes were awkward, my hands clumsy, my efforts weak. But the simple act of mixing colors, of focusing on a delicate brushstroke, was profoundly therapeutic. It was effort, it was time, it was creation, all the things Ethan valued in his work, but which he had inadvertently stripped from my life by making everything so easy and financed. During the next planned visit to his mansion, a few weeks later, the tone was subtly different. He and Clara still hosted the elegant, formal lunch. They still inquired about my comfort. But when Ethan began to steer the conversation toward my finances, as he always did, I didn't recoil or become defensively quiet. "So, Mom, just a quick check-in," he started, already pulling up his banking app. "Everything still good with the transfer? No issues?" "The transfer is fine, Ethan," I replied, meeting his eyes calmly. "And actually, I've started putting the money to very good use. I've signed up for a watercolor class at the community center. I'm taking 3 evenings a week now. I've met some lovely people, and I'm thoroughly enjoying learning again." The announcement clearly threw him off balance. He blinked, the phone still open in his hand. Clara paused mid-sip of her mineral water. This was not the standard passive response they expected. "Watercolor?" Ethan finally managed, a puzzled frown creasing his forehead. "You're painting, Mom? That's great, but are you sure you should be going out alone in the evenings? I can hire a private tutor to come here, to your place, if you'd prefer. Or perhaps a membership to a more exclusive club?" He immediately sought to professionalize and privatize my simple pleasure, to wrap it back up in the cocoon of his wealth. "No, dear," I said, offering a genuine, soft smile this time. "I like the community center. I like mixing with people. It's messy and it's fun. It's not about exclusivity, it's about learning." Clara, ever pragmatic, chimed in, "Well, as long as you're enjoying it, Catherine. But do you need an updated set of professional brushes? I'm sure Ethan can expense that for you." I shook my head gently. "I'm using the starter set, thank you. They work perfectly." I realized in that moment that they would never understand, and I finally made peace with that. They could only express love and concern through the lens of transaction and acquisition. But by using the money to reclaim my identity, I had taken back the power. I had transformed the allowance from a symbol of my dependency into a symbol of my liberation. I knew that Ethan would likely never fully close the emotional distance he had created with his wealth. He would always be the millionaire son who measured love in deposits and duty in expense reports. But I would no longer be the mother who only saw the payment and not the peace it could afford her. Before leaving that day, I made sure to give Ethan a gift, a small, tangible counterpoint to the silk scarf and the large monthly sum. It was a card I had made myself, painted with my newly acquired watercolor skills, a simple, small landscape of the park near his office, slightly imperfect, but made with effort. He took the card, his expression awkward and unsure. He didn't know how to value something that wasn't priced. "Happy Mother's Day again, dear," I said, a slight knowing smile on my face, deliberately ignoring the fact that Mother's Day was weeks past. I made this just for you. Please don't try to buy a better one.
He looked at the painting, then at me.
Thanks, Mom,
He mumbled, genuinely confused, but something in my posture prevented him from dismissing it entirely. It was a small, quiet victory. As Leo drove me home, the dark sedan no longer felt like a cage. It felt like a comfortable ride, paid for by the tireless work of a son who, despite his fundamental misunderstanding of the heart, genuinely wished for my comfort. The $5,000 was still just $5,000, but now I saw it differently. It was the financial security that allowed me to paint, to laugh in my class, to live a rich inner life that his money could never touch and his questions could never quantify. I was not defined by his wealth, but empowered by it. And that, I realized, was a priceless, hard-won piece.
Thank you for spending your time with Alicia. If this story moved you, let your support be felt. Like, share, and subscribe. Your presence inspires the next tale. Until our voices meet again. Stay calm, stay curious, and keep dreaming.